Tonight, how many global warming doomsday predictions have to come and go before we just don't believe them anymore? It's December 29th, and you're watching The Ezra Levant Show. Why should others go to jail when you're the biggest carbon consumer I know?
There's 8,500 customers here, and you won't give them an answer.
You come here once a year with a sign, and you feel morally superior.
The only thing I have to say to the government for why I publish it is because it's my bloody right to do so.
The thing about doomsday predictions is that sooner or later, that moment of truth arrives. So this is a better way to do it, just a plain old the end is near sandwich board than say this way, which is very specific. And so when May 21st, 2011 comes and goes, what do you do then? Reschedule? I like this image from The Simpsons, the end is near, 50th anniversary edition. That's a good one, isn't it? As you can see, I'm talking about global warming. It's the perpetual sky is falling movement. I mean, it's been decades. And yet every single year, these Chicken Littles tell us we've got just 10, 5, maybe just 1 year left to save the world. I mean, listen to this guy, a senator back in 2009, saying that the Arctic Ocean is about to become ice-free in just 5 years, as in by now?
In 5 years, scientists predict we will have the first ice-free Arctic summer.
Yeah, he's the Secretary of State now, and he's still saying we're doomed if we don't do exactly what he says we must do. It's not just politicians, so-called scientists who receive huge grants to propagate the theory of man-made global warming. Well, they're even nuttier. Snowfalls are now just a thing of the past, says the Independent newspaper, but they didn't make that up. They were quoting Dr. David Viner, a senior scientist at the Climate Research Unit, a top UN climate science source. He said, quote, children just aren't going to know what snow is. It's going to be, quote, a very rare and exciting event. He said we'd run out of snow 10 years ago. He said he'd run out of snow in 10 years, and he said that 15 years ago. You see the problem here? You cannot have a career-length scam if you keep setting deadlines by which people have to listen to you or we're all going to die. It's just not a good business model, 5, 10-year predictions. So how do they do it? You know, the first global warming conference was in Rio in 1992. The Kyoto Protocol was from 1997. So we're talking 20 years now. And according to the United Nations' own scientists, there has been an 18-year hiatus in detectable global warming, as in it's paused, it's stopped in plain English. So what are you going to do? Well, obviously, you stop saying global warming and you say climate change, could mean anything. And then you say mystical things like global weirding or climate chaos. You know, there's this anti-global warming group called 350.org, funded by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund out of New York. Just stop for a second and think of the irony there. All their money comes from John D. Rockefeller, the greatest oil man and industrialist who ever lived, who created an oil company so big, Standard Oil, it was broken up to create Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, etc. But look at the name, 350.org. That's from their outdated theory that if carbon dioxide gets to be more than 350 parts per million in the atmosphere, global warming will run away and we'll all die. That's the theory, but in fact, carbon dioxide is now more than 400 parts per million. It's still a trace gas, obviously, and it's what people exhale and plants inhale. But you see my point? Even their very name has become obsolete. The world is over 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide, and global warming, it's stopped, it's paused. There is no correlation between carbon dioxide and global warming. If there was, you'd sure see it, but there isn't, so you don't. Well, do you think they're going to go change their name? Do you think any journalist is going to even ask them about that? No. I'd like to hear the theory one day of how carbon dioxide causes climate chaos. There is no theory. I mean, those are mystical words, words of superstition. You're just supposed to agree and remember that 97% of scientists tell you so. I mean, take it from this scientist on CNN.
When it comes to climate change, public opinion is near 50-50, but 97% of scientists who dedicate their lives to studying our climate say that it's happening, and it's happening because of human activities. With all the evidence we have of a warming Earth, it's harder and harder to be a skeptic these days. We're talking about temperature measurements, sea level rise, ocean acidification, and the reduction in ice shelves in Greenland and Antarctica, for example. The fingerprint of climate change is clear in extreme weather events.
Did you know that global warming has fingerprints like that? 97% of scientists like CNN's Derek Van Dam say so. Sorry, I can't stop laughing. Actually, he's not a scientist at all. He has a degree in meteorology and broadcast and cinematic arts. He's a weatherman. But hey, he put that all on the screen, so it must be true. CNN says so. I like that part where he says that 97%, that statistic is just from NASA. Sure it is, yeah. He just says it, so it's true. I mean, of course. But hang on, though. Is it true that the globe is warming? Or is it 97% true that it's related to carbon dioxide? Or do 97% of them agree that mankind is causing the global warming? Or is it that 97% of scientists say we can do anything about it? Oh, he doesn't know. Stop asking for details. And just focus on how handsome and self-righteous this graduate of the cinematic arts is. Hey, look, I don't mean to be all science-y, but greenhouse gas emissions are overwhelmingly from nature, not man-made. The number one greenhouse gas by far, overwhelmingly, is water vapor, as in evaporation from the world's oceans. It traps heat from the sun. Natural carbon dioxide and methane are overwhelmingly more than man-made emissions of those two same gases. Here's an illustration taken from the United Nations' own scientific panel on climate change. 750 billion tons of carbon naturally cycles through the environment every year. 750 billion tons. For comparison, all of Canada's industry combined is 726 million tons. So we are literally 1/10 of 1% of naturally occurring carbon dioxide. The oil sands are about 75 million tons, so 1/100th of 1%. And you're telling me global warming is man-made? The global warming that hasn't been detected in 18 years? But look, back to my point. There's only so long you can say it's going to be doomsday before it's time to put up or shut up about the doomsday. But if you push the day of reckoning out too far into the future, like say 40 years when CNN's Derek Van Dam is about to retire, so he doesn't need the scam anymore, well then if you push it that far in the future, you don't really scare people enough to make them pay you the taxes that you're demanding today because it's far off in the future. But if you say the day of reckoning is too soon, well, you're going to be proven to be a false prophet. And that's why this year's Paris Global Warming Party was so brilliant. They just stopped with the science. They just stopped with anything numerical, other than a truly bizarre mystical agreement that the world's temperature ought to be stopped from growing beyond 1.5 or maybe 2 degrees, depends. They've got this phrase now, common but differentiated. It means everyone in the world who's an important person agrees to the superstition. And then from there, every politician or bureaucrat can do with it what they like. Reduce emissions or not. Carbon tax or not. Shutting down the oil sands or not. Whatever. It's up to each government and what they can get away with in the name of global warming if they want. There's no science anymore. None is needed. It's just accepted that climate change is a thing and it's bad, like littering. I mean, no one argues with littering anymore. 97% of scientists say littering is wrong. And really, do you even need to be told that now? Don't ask questions about past predictions being wrong. Don't ask questions about the theory of global warming itself being wrong and about why warming has paused despite carbon dioxide being 400 parts per million now. Don't ask questions about how the theory suddenly shifts from global warming to global weirding. Don't ask questions about how words like weirding or climate chaos are even scientific terms at all. Just don't ask questions. Just get with the fashion. Get a grant if you're smart. Pay a tax if you're not. Whatever the political boss in your jurisdiction tells you. Stay with us. More on this subject after these words. Welcome back to the show. Dalton McGuinty is a name said in Ontario, usually accompanied by various curse words, but he is trying to rehabilitate his image and burnish his legacy. Joining me now to talk about him is our friend Laurie Goldstein, Toronto Sun columnist. Laurie, great to see you again. You have been a Dalton McGuinty follower, not just because you're a columnist of the Toronto Sun who covers politics, but you have a special interest in green energy, which is a code word for all sorts of subsidized schemes from wind power and solar power and things like that. Let's start with Dalton McGuinty's, his reemergence. What is he doing and what's he trying to accomplish?
Well, in the wake of the Paris Agreement, what he's trying to do, he wrote, for example, a column in the Globe and Mail, and where he said, he's trying to say that, look, going green, making society cleaner, you have to pay for it. And that's what I did. I did it early. I did the tough stuff of getting rid of coal-fired emissions. I inherited a hydro system that was a mess, so I went in and did it. So that's what the story he wants people to believe. It's just not the real story.
Now, this comes hard on the heels of an astounding report by Ontario's Auditor General. So not a partisan critic, but someone going through the books. She says that, again, even on its own terms, Ontario's Green Energy Act, the move off of coal, has saddled Ontarians with, what did she say, $35 billion in extra?
And then up to $133 billion over the longer term.
Extra power.
That's what people are paying beyond the market price of electricity for electricity in Ontario.
If you think about that, that is such, 33, was it 33 or 35
Yeah,
billion?
no, 33 over the past X number of years, like a decade or something, yeah.
That is as big a burden as an entirely new HST or GST. That's like an additional income tax, it's regressive in that if you're a millionaire, okay, you use more power than an ordinary Joe, but not so much that this high power is going to kill you.
Yeah.
But if you are a low-income person, if you're a factory that needs energy to hire people, this is a devastating form of extraction of money.
Well, let's just go over a couple things. It is fair for Mr. McGuinty to argue, as he does, that when he came to power in 2003, the hydro system had been neglected. That's true. Transmission lines had been allowed to disrepair. The grid was in poor shape. So whoever came in was going to have to do substantial spending, which would raise consumer rates. He did get rid of coal-fired electricity, which, whatever you think of the issue of global warming, coal is the most polluting one, and there are reasons that you would do that. That's not the issue. The issue is that the way he did it, according to two auditors general, here's the best way I can illustrate it. Let's not make a debate over whether we should have wind and solar power or not. Let's concede that Mr. McGuinty had a majority government. He could do what he wanted. His experts put in place a fee to encourage wind and solar developers to develop electricity. He already had that in place. Then the government basically swallowed the Al Gore Kool-Aid and decided it was going to go whole hog. They upped the subsidy rate to wind and solar developers enormously. Their own experts said to them, you don't have to do this. The current plan you have is working fine. They ignored their experts. They did not do a business plan. They went ahead after being warned it wasn't necessary. We don't need this power. You don't have to pay this much. And that alone, on that alone, not wind and solar power, but the added subsidy added $9.2 billion to the hydro bills of Ontarians. $9.2 billion, simply because they didn't listen to their own experts, and it's not just, there's been two Auditors General reports. One was by the former Auditor General Jim McCarter, one by the current one, Bonnie Lysyk. The one by McCarter was in 2011. The one by Lysyk was in December. They both say exactly the same thing. You didn't have to do this. Today, Ezra, whatever you think of wind and solar power, Bonnie Lysyk, the Auditor General, says that in Ontario, we are paying as consumers 2 times the rate for wind power that's average in America, and 3.5 times the rate for solar in America.
I want to point out 2 things. The first is that the principal secretary to Dalton McGuinty and the champion of this Green Energy Act is a guy named Gerald Butts,
Yeah,
who is now the principal secretary to Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
So step one is get ready for a national version of this. And I want to ask you something. I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I think the world has enough disastrous facts in it. You don't need to make up more. But I look at some of the insiders who got those super sweet deals. And for example, Mike Crawley, who was the president of the Ontario Liberal Party, went on to be the president of the Federal Liberal Party. He was the boss of one of the largest green energy companies that got these absurdly generous contracts. And I am not here with any evidence that there was a secret sweetheart deal. All of them got sweetheart deals. I'm not saying it was just a liberal, but it's just so gross when your Liberal Party president happens to be one of the great profiteers here. It looks like an inside game.
There were other liberals too who were involved. Now I think we have to be fair here. To me, the outrage here is the policy itself. It doesn't surprise me that a Liberal government or an NDP government or a Conservative government would have, as a result, that there would have been Liberals and Conservatives and NDP who profited. It's a concern. I agree it's a concern. There are lawsuits going on about some of those issues, whether the government played political favors. One of them by an energy giant in the United States who is charging that this government made political decisions favoring Liberals denied by the government.
Right.
But they gave 20-year guaranteed contracts to these people at subsidies that we were talking about.
That's why Ontario power prices are guaranteed to grow for 20 years.
But it's even worse, and here's why. Wind and solar makes the rest of the system operate inefficiently, and here's why. Not only did they give them 20-year no-cut contracts, but they said Ontarians have to buy wind and solar power first, even when we don't need it. The power system doesn't just operate at one level. It goes up and down, and that's why you bring in different emitters, different power producers in that. But since we have to take their power first, it makes the nuclear plants less efficient. It makes the natural gas plants less efficient.
Niagara Falls, perhaps the most efficient source of power ever.
As a result now, we have so much excess power. The Auditor General said we have enough excess power right now to power Manitoba. We will pretty soon have enough to power Nova Scotia. And we are dumping power like hydro, dam, green power, cheaply. We're selling at a loss. Why? Because we have to pay the wind and solar producers whenever they happen to have power for us first. Beyond that, we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars. You know how the old joke about farmers is they have so many subsidies, they're being paid not to grow strawberries, not to grow? Well, there are contracts involving hundreds of millions of dollars where we have to pay wind and solar when we don't use their energy. Now, in fairness, that also happens in natural gas plants and in other providers. But the problem is, at least when you have natural gas power, at least when you have nuclear power, at least when you have hydropower, you know you're going to have it when you need it.
It works all the time.
With wind and solar, you don't know when you're going to have it. And so
you're building an entirely second infrastructure,
and remember,
but you need the first infrastructure to back it up.
And remember, the scandal that drove McGuinty from power, he basically resigned, prorogued the legislature, was the canceled gas plants scandal. That was part of the green energy plan. Boy. Why? Because not only was he going to use it to replace coal, you needed natural gas plants to back up
when the wind
and solar.
Shine. And in Canada, in our cold winter, in our dark winters with a short daylight.
So let's just do some little addition. $9.2 billion more than they had to pay. This isn't don't have wind and solar. This is $9.2 billion you didn't have to pay to those producers to get their energy. $1.1 billion, up to $1.1 billion for the two canceled gas plants. Okay, so now we're at $10.3 billion. The Auditor General said that the smart meters, which were also part of that, remember they were supposed to help us, they underestimated expenditures and overestimated revenues, all in about $1.5 billion. So we're getting up now to what, 9.3, 10.3, we're getting up to 11, almost $12 billion.
You know, Laurie, these numbers, I think Ontarians are numb to them because $1 billion boondoggle, you say that phrase in Ontario, people say, which one?
Okay.
And I think that Ontarians, this is what drives me crazy about this province, is that people are numb to it. They say, yeah, that's the new normal. They've lowered their expectations down.
Okay.
I mean, that's my view as a relative newcomer to Ontario. Here's what I'm worried about. My heart is, I'm sort of half Ontario, half Alberta, and we hear from Rachel Notley, she's going to bring in green energy and subsidies, and I think Alberta is about to be introduced to all these games and schemes and centrally planned economies and insider bids.
Let's put it in a way that everyone can understand, for Albertans and Ontarians and Canadians. In the past 10 years, according to the Auditor General, Bonnie Lysyk, electricity rates in Ontario, this is 2004 to 2014, 10 years have gone up 80%.
80%.
And look, to be fair to Mr. McGuinty, they would have had to go up, but they did not have to go up 80%.
You know, I'm a little bit familiar with Pennsylvania because I go down there from time to time to watch the fracking revolution. And their average household in Pennsylvania has had $1,000 reduction in the price of energy per year because shale gas is so cheap. And that has naturally caused power plants to switch from coal to natural gas, not by some government edict. Natural gas is so cheap and plentiful down there, the power companies say, well, let's switch off coal to this natural gas. So besides the jobs, you reduce the cost, and if you're worried about carbon dioxide, natural gas is half out of coal.
And what I would say to Mr. McGuinty...
How are you going to compete against Pennsylvania if you're raising your power price in Ontario 80%?
And beyond that, what I would say to Mr. McGuinty and the current Premier, Kathleen Wynne, is, okay, the Auditor General said that we have enough surplus power today to supply Manitoba, heading towards Nova Scotia. If we have a massive surplus, why are the rates going up? The basic rule of the marketplace is excessive supply. Rates should go down. They have, the other problem is, Ezra, that in Ontario, Wynne is doubling down, actually tripling down on McKinsey's, at least if they would stop signing more wind. Just stop. Stop.
Yeah, they're building more.
But
over the objections of local land.
But that is another horrible chapter we could go on about. Anyone who opposed a wind turbine, and these things are huge. These aren't Dutch windows.
Yeah, these are as high as
anyone who opposed that, according to Mr. McGuinty when he was Premier, and his Energy Minister, Mr. Smitherman, was a NIMBY.
Yeah.
But when people in two jurisdictions where the Liberals needed to retain seats in the 2011 election said, we don't want these gas plants, that if we don't have them, will lead to power shortages. Mr. McGuinty axed them, costing all of us $1.1 billion. This is...
Lord, I would say this. You're telling horror stories from Ontario. I'd say to my Alberta friends, get ready for your Alberta versions of everything.
You get people coming over the hill, whether they are public or private sector or politicians, telling you about the joys of wind and solar. Get out your pitchforks, your tar, and your feathers. Don't kill them, but run them out of town.
Yeah, right on. Lori Goldstein, great to see you. Thanks for being here. You know, you get me upset because I know these things. I know you've been following them so closely, and yet we have not yet learned the lessons from it. Thank you, my friend. Folks, stay with us. Oh, boy. Our next guest, Mark Morano from ClimateDepot.com. Get ready for him. He's after the break.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know the Rebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to therebel.media/store to find out more.
Well, one of my favorite guys about the theory of man-made global warming is our next guest, Mark Morano. He's the publisher of ClimateDepot.com. He is a one-man walking encyclopedia about climate science, which is very rare in journalism because most journalists are just stenographers regurgitating press releases. Mark actually knows the facts better than most of the antis, the global warming extremists. Mark joins us now via Skype from the Washington, D.C. area. Great to see you, Mark. You've had a busy year. It's been a busy year for you, including the debut of your new movie, Climate Hustle.
Yeah, thank you, Ezra. Yeah, we had our big debut back in early December in Paris. And for my troubles, the day of our premiere, they had wanted posters out with my face all over Paris. I was actually sightseeing by the Arc de Triomphe, and there it was, my face on a wanted poster for being a, quote, climate criminal, or in French, the criminal du climate.
You know, it's so telling. I mean, they had 30, 40, 50,000 pro-global warming activists in town, and the mere thought that a single person, or maybe there were 100 skeptics all combined in the whole city, was so offensive to these folks that you would dare dissent, that they actually call you a criminal. They wanted to shut you down, protest you. Some of these folks actually would jail you if they could.
Yeah, that's the thing. And the New York Times actually interviewed me about being the wanted criminal, and a couple other Financial Times. And the bottom line is, this wasn't just a publicity stunt by environmentalists. We have United States sitting senators who want RICO, organized crime statutes, applied to global warming skeptics. We had NASA's lead global warming scientists call for crimes against humanity against global warming skeptics. So these are not unusual. They're not outliers. Our own president has said he wanted to shut down climate denial. His own administrators and his cabinets have said there's no deniers in my agency. It's a complete culture of intimidation, and the UN loves that kind of stuff too. They try to, the head of the UN, Rajendra Pachauri, is on record as saying he would like to see skeptics rub their faces in asbestos. He said that a few years back.
He's crazy. You know, in our own country here in Canada, David Suzuki repeatedly says that climate skeptics should be jailed. And just recently, a registered charity called Eco-Justice that takes foreign funds to lobby against the oil sands submitted a legal brief to the Competition Bureau asking for criminal action against climate skeptics and 10-year publication bans or gag orders. Like these folks, to call them liberal, they're not liberal, they're fascistic, they're authoritarian. Enough talk about them. Let's talk about what else was going on in Paris. The most important news from Paris was the premiere of your film, Climate Hustle. The second most important news, I'm kidding, is what they call COP21, Conference of the Parties 21, this gathering of tens of thousands of diplomats, bureaucrats, politicians. They do this every year in beautiful tourist cities every year. Next year, they're going to Morocco. What came out of the Paris party this year?
Well, there's been a lot of talk of this being historic. The New York Times columnist said that we may have saved the earth for human civilization. A lot of just grandiose. The journalists at the meeting erupted into massive applause and cheers and hooping and hollering. I mean, this was heralded as one of the greatest achievements of the 21st century. The problem is, and if you look, you don't have to listen to any skeptics talk about it. Let's look at the climate activists. Bill McKibben's not happy. He says this merely saved the planet for another day, that we've only basically put an extension on saving the planet, that this is not nearly adequate. James Hansen, the former NASA lead scientist, had called this agreement a fraud. And John Kerry himself was on Meet the Press here in the U.S. on TV, and he said, they said, what kind of enforcement can you have for this historic agreement? And he admitted, we have a new phrase now, Ezra, global shaming. Countries will be shamed into doing the right thing.
Yeah, I hear that works on the
mechanism. So it's basically just them saying we really care about global warming, and darn it, we're going to do something.
Yeah, I hear that really works on Vladimir Putin, climate shaming. I hear the Chinese dictatorship that wasn't afraid of mowing down protesters in Tiananmen Square with tanks. I hear climate shaming really works on them. What a laugh. I've learned a word only in the last month or so, Mark, called virtue signaling. It's like people who are vegan. They just absolutely have to tell everybody else about it. People who drive a Prius, the whole point is not to drive it, it's to tell everybody else you've got it. You're signaling how virtuous you were. In my mind, the entire Paris Climate Conference is one massive exercise in self-promotion, taking selfies, and virtue signaling, telling the world we're better than you. And the very fact that their only stick is we're going to shame you, we're going to look down our nose at you, sort of proves the point. I don't even think they're even pretending to be a scientific or environmental organization anymore. It's social justice warriors on the public dime. Last word to you, Mark.
Yeah, well, we had Alec Baldwin and Leonardo DiCaprio, Al Gore. They all came to this UN summit in Paris. Alec Baldwin was hilarious. He actually said, I don't know what I'm doing here. I've been going out. I'm staying in a fancy hotel, going out to really nice meals. The airports at these events usually are typically clogged with all the private jets to the point where you can't even use them or park your jets. There's so many at these. But This is all about saving the earth. So you're right. This idea that they're more virtuous, that's what it's all about. It's about making them feel superior. And now, but it's really about wealth transfer. What really is going on here, Ezra, is that this price tag right now is $16.5 trillion just for the renewable energy mandate. That doesn't include all of the wealth transfers. We're talking about $1 trillion there, $100 billion a year going to the developing world. And it's not going to mitigate the effects of climate change. It's going to the countries countries that can keep their citizens in poverty the best will get the most money. And then these governments will then build monuments to themselves. They'll build new stadiums, and they'll actually just use the money to buy votes for their next election. And that's what this is about. It's about wealth transfer. The UN vice chair said it. It's climate policy is about redistributing wealth. And that's what this meeting was really about.
Amazing. Mark Morano, climatedepot.com. Great to talk with you. Look forward to talking to you a lot more in 2016. Stay with us, folks. More after these words.
Ontario residents are being hosed on electricity prices. The latest Auditor General's report says we've been overcharged by $37 billion over the last several years. That works out to nearly $2,800 for every man, woman, and child. Why? Mismanagement and bad policy choices from the Ontario Liberals. It's going to cost us billions more in coming years. Energy Minister Bob Chiarelli won't take responsibility. He's lashing out. It's time for Bob to go. If you agree, go to firebob.ca. That's firebob.ca and make your voice heard.
Tell you, a couple of really smart guys there. I think that what Laurie Goldstein said is not just interesting in terms of the real history of why Ontario became a have-not province. I mean, you take 11 or 33 or 35 billion dollars out of people's pockets to subsidize green schemes, many of which happen to be Liberal-connected friends. $35 billion is going to hurt a lot of people. It's going to drive a lot of businesses out of the province, and that's just the beginning. It's interesting for historical reasons, but it's also interesting for Alberta, which has announced it's going to bring in its own vicious carbon tax. I call it vicious because it's as large as a provincial sales tax would be. It is going to hit people hard. So take a look at Ontario. Take a look at unreliable green schemes, extremely expensive, subsidized by everyone else. Get ready for very expensive power and fuel poverty, as they call it. But don't think you are somehow immune to this if you live in the other 8 provinces and 3 territories in this country. Ontario was the template. Remember, as we talked about with Laurie, the Principal Secretary to Dalton McGuinty, the Green Energy Act champion in the Ontario government, his name is Gerald Butts. And he is now the Principal Secretary to Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, who has said as much as a carbon tax is coming. He uses the phrase, put a price on carbon, which is just code for carbon tax for people who don't like saying the T word. So using this vague, gauzy excuse of, well, 97% of scientists agree. Agree what? Agree that if you charge me more taxes, it'll make a dent in the weather? Do 97% of scientists agree that taxing me is going to change the weather? Really? And how much will it change the weather? Well, don't ask those questions. Journalists certainly are trained not to. You saw the journalists jumping for joy, literally jumping for joy in the press room at the Paris Environmental Conference earlier this month. Look, 2016 is a year of sliding back for Canada. It's a year where our economy will be buffeted not just by overspending and deficits, but will be hurt by taxes. I believe that Stephen Harper did enough things right economically, and that our economy is so large that it's still going to be on a good trajectory for a while. You can't destroy an economy's path overnight. But I believe that between Kathleen Wynne's disaster in Ontario, which is a 10-year disaster now, and I believe the new unfolding disaster in Alberta, coupled with Justin Trudeau federally, I believe these things will be like, you know, Gulliver in Lilliput, with enough little people tying down Gulliver, the giant will be brought down. I believe the Canadian economy, which has done so well these last 10 years, will be tamed and then dragged down. And I think we will see much more poverty, energy poverty, in the name of a low carbon future. That's the ideology, that's the superstition of the left. And I have to say, it's in fashion. I'm Ezra Levant. Thanks for watching my show. Keep fighting for freedom. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.